back to Pedder Unplugged for our last episode of 2022. And what a year it's been. Of course, it's 50 years since Lake Pedder was controversially flooded. But it hasn't been a year of mourning, because the loss is temporary. And by sharing the story and significance of the original Lake Pedder, like these wonderful people do here on this podcast, its legacy lives on. Dams don't last forever, and the phenomenon of removing large impoundments to restore natural river flows and biodiversity has taken off around the world. It's only a matter of time before Tasmania catches up. Hey, and December the 14th was the 40th anniversary of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area, or the TWA. It came amid the Franklin River campaign, which was successful in part due to the lessons learnt from the loss of Pedder. And included in the TWA boundary was the unnatural Pedder impoundment, with the intent that one day, soon, the original will be restored. I'm Tabatha Badger, and today's guest is mountaineer, photographer, and author of 4 books, David Neilson. After being a member of the first party to climb the Blade on Federation Peak, on his way home from the southwest, David first visited Lake Pedder. He conceived the idea to publish a book with images of Lake Pedder to assist the campaign to save the lake. Southwest Tasmania, a land of the wild, highlighted the threatened wilderness of Western Tasmania, but by the time it went to print, Pedder had already been inundated. But one of David's images is playing a role in saving Lake Pedder still, and you've likely seen it. It's taken from the Franklin Ranges, overlooking Pedder, with the iconic tannin-stained mega ripples lapping the pink quartzite beach. It's been made into a poster, and most recently, a puzzle. This recognisable wonder is playing a role in inspiring a new cohort to call for the restoration of Lake Pedder. So, here's episode 14 of Pedder Unplugged with David Neilson.
I fell in love with wild places probably because I spent time in my early childhood with my visiting several farms that my uncles owned in Western Victoria, and just wandering around those properties, being allowed to go out and explore the creeks and mountains in the adjoining properties. And one of those properties was very close to the Grampians in Western Victoria. And I could see these amazing cliffs up past the edge of the farm, and knew that one day I'd want to go rock climbing on those peaks. So that was really the beginning of my love of wild places. Then I went to university, Monash University, and joined the bushwalking club, as it was called, but I knew that they also did rock climbing and canoeing. And I started doing walking, and then very quickly started doing rock climbing. And it was one of my rock climbing trips really that led me to Lake Pedder. So a group of us were keen to go and climb on Federation Peak in southwest Tasmania, and there was an unclimbed ridge on Federation Peak, Blade Ridge, that we were keen to attempt. So in February 1968, 4 of us went into Federation Peak. We had some bad weather, and then the weather turned in our favour, and we spent 2 days climbing the Blade and climbing the northwest face on Federation, which had been climbed before. So we were the first people to climb the entire northwest side of Federation, I guess you'd say. After that trip finished, we walked out via Lake Pedder, and we'd heard a lot about Lake Pedder by then. The campaign to try and stop the flooding had already started, because we'd found out that the Hydroelectric Commission was keen to flood the lake, so we were keen to walk out to Pedder. What I thought I might do is read an excerpt from my diary, which was in my first book, and I guess it sets the scene for my first visit to Lake Pedder. It was late in the morning when we left Junction Creek and headed along the old Port Davey track towards Lake Pedder. We had left the Eastern Arthurs after several weeks of climbing and were enjoying the peace of the valleys. We were not in a hurry, and it was dark when we first glimpsed the lake. a thin strip of water set beneath a jagged range of peaks with an evening sky above. By the time we reached the beach, darkness had fallen. As we walked along the broad flat sands, the moon cast its light over the scene, creating its unique interplay of white and black. It was a peaceful scene, a striking contrast to the wind and rain we had known in the Eastern Arthurs a few days before. During the night, the mist came down, and with the rising of the early morning sun, the lake and surroundings were clothed in a diffuse cloud that lent a soft colour to everything. Gradually, the mist lifted, and the still waters reflected the surrounding peaks. The colours became stronger, the rich dark red of the water, the white of the quartzite sands, and the greens of the trees and vegetation. On this first visit, our stay was brief. We left with an impression of peace and beauty, which was both unique to the southwest and at the same time an integral part of it.
That was really beautiful. I've got your new book, Chasing
How
the
long
Mountain
was
Light,
it?
in front of me, between that first trip to Pedder until your next.
Well, I guess the campaign was already underway to try and save the lake. I had a limited involvement with that campaign. I did a few things, but I wasn't centrally involved in any decision making or anything of that ilk. A couple of things that have come to mind, which I did participate in. There was a Tasmanian government had a tourist bureau in Collins Street, Melbourne, and so we had a demonstration outside the tourist bureau, and we're all there with our placards, Save Lake Pedder, which was a rather strange sort of place to have a demonstration, but it seemed a logical place because of it was the Tasmanian Tourist Bureau. One of the other things I did was the campaign had a caravan that was like a mobile information centre, and that was based in Hobart, but that caravan toured around the eastern states, went to Adelaide, went to Sydney, and it went to Canberra. And somehow or other, I ended up with the job of driving the caravan or towing the caravan from Canberra to Melbourne. And I hadn't not done any towing of caravans, and then so it was quite a challenge. But anyway, I brought the caravan down from Canberra to Melbourne, and that played quite a significant role, I think, in getting the message around to the mainland. It had been initially, obviously, a campaign just based in Tasmania, but spreading the word more widely was really valuable for the campaign. So,
And of course, you were living in Victoria at the time of the
Melbourne, yes, I
campaign.
was living in Melbourne. In 1971, I decided that I wanted to try and that it might be helpful for the campaign to try and get a book published on Southwest Tasmania, and which would, of course, include Lake Pedder. And I decided that in early 1972, I would spend time doing trips into the southwest and to Lake Pedder. So it was really 4 years after I did the rock climbing at Federation Peak that I went back to the southwest, did a number of trips to different locations, taking photographs, and then including 2 trips to Lake Pedder in February and March 1972, and they were about 10 days each.
What way did you go in to get to Lake Pedder? Testing memory.
In 1965, when other friends went bushwalking in southwest Tasmania, you had to walk all the way from Medina into the southwest. Then they built the Strathgordon Road, and that allowed you to walk to Lake Pedder in about, I'm guessing, about 3 or 4 hours, maybe 4 hours.
Wow.
So you could walk in from the road. And of course, that road did destroy the wildness very, very much so of the southwest. But I suspect, I just can't remember how it came in, but I think I walked in. I never flew into Lake Pedder. I will have walked in with a week's food or 10 days' food from getting a ride along that Strathgordon Road.
And of course, you would have had all of your photography equipment with you as well to document the region. And that was, that always adds to a heavy pack when you've got to carry in your gear.
I did have a reasonably heavy pack, but back then I was a bit stronger than I am today, and I seemed to survive somehow or other. I found I could just carry I'm not a strong bushwalker, but I could just carry 8 or 10 days food if I had to, and minimal camera equipment. So that's what I would have. That's what I did take into Lake Pedder. And so I spent those on both those trips. I spent about, I think it was a bit over a week on each time taking photographs of Pedder.
What were the highlights or the kind of standout moments in those 2 weeks? Be it an individual moment when the weather magically produced a sublime or serenic moment, or was there a particular location around Pedder that really stood out for you?
Getting to know the lake and its different moods was significant. Certainly, I went up onto the Franklins a number of times because you got this magical view down onto the lake, or the best high view you could get really outside an aeroplane or a helicopter. And so I would go up there whenever I thought the weather was going to be good for taking photographs. I climbed up onto Mount Solitary, which is the peak. Now looks like an island in the impoundment, but it's to the east of the lake, and that gave a different view. One of the things I was thinking about this morning was, well, the lake was very beautiful. It was 3 or 4 kilometres square, set in this broad valley, and the backdrop of, particularly of the Franklins behind, gave it this mountain lake flavour. But you also had this other aspect to the lake that you couldn't see from the ground, but you had this beautiful serpentine river flowing out of the lake, which is the river that's called the Serpentine. And if you see some of the photographs, I think in the Jeff Parr photography presentation, you can see those beautiful serpentine bends in the river as it leaves the lake. So it's really another aspect, I think, to the beauty of the lake, was that it flowed out into this wonderful river that in turn flowed into the Gordon.
Yeah, it's magnificent to see the Lands Department aerial photographs over the Serpentine, just as Pedder had started to flood from the Serpentine Dam end. I hadn't realised how embanked the river's edge was. And then you can sort of see the impoundment waters rising around it and the really definitive banks of the Serpentine still existing there. It's an amazing photograph.
Yes, I was actually, some of those photos are in Les Southall's Mountains of Paradise in the back of that. And they're very striking images. Gives you a whole new view of if you haven't been if one hadn't been in a plane, which I never had been. It's quite an amazing little river that flowed out of a beautiful lake.
So what happened with your book?
I spent 3 or 4 months of doing these trips in the summer of 1972. Then I came back to Melbourne and spent time putting the book together. I had no idea whether I'd find a publisher or not, but I put a sort of a dummy book together and then approached various publishers in Melbourne. The first one said it looked very nice, but he was sure that I would never find a publisher. And then I went to the second publisher, and that was an Adelaide-based publisher, quite a significant Australian publisher at the time, Rigby Limited. And they liked the book and took it back to Adelaide and decided after a couple of months that they would indeed publish it. So that was great news. In the beginning, they were hoping to publish it in 1974, but that got pushed back to the middle of 1975. And I guess I knew all along that the lake was going to be flooded by the end of 1972. But I guess I was hoping that my book might be able to play some sort of role in having that decision turned around and the lake not being flooded. But of course that didn't happen. And so it was disappointing that the book didn't play a role in saving the lake. I was very pleased to have a book published. That was a more personal aspect of the project.
Yeah, it's quite a huge achievement to have that done. So when the book was published, you were in New York, is that right?
That's correct, yes. I'd done my first trip. I decided after spending that time photographing Southwest Tasmania that I'd go to Patagonia in southern South America, which is in Chile and Argentina. And and do some trips there and some climbing and perhaps try and get a book published on Patagonia. And so I'd done my first trip to Patagonia and then gone north through South America and into the United States. And I was in New York when my father had posted me copies of the book. So I went to the New York main GPO, General Post Office, opened this parcel in this cavernous hall of a post office in New York, and it seemed a long, long way away from southwest Tasmania. But I was very pleased to see copies of the book. Obviously, one's first published book is something pretty special, so I was very pleased about that. But there was also a sadness involved because by then the lake was well and truly flooded, and there was certainly no way that it was going to be unflooded in the short term. It was going to stay that way for a long time, clearly. So that was disappointing. Oh, very disappointing. Sorry, I should stress that.
Yeah.
It was a great loss to so many people who been fortunate to go to Pedder and to appreciate its beautiful natural values. To lose that lake for a very small amount of energy. I worked out not so long ago that it seemed a reasonable sized wind farm will generate as much energy as Lake Pedder does. So it seems just a shocking thing that we've foregone such a beautiful lake for such a small gain in our electricity.
Yeah, the decision making behind the flooding of Pedder and the ongoing impounding of Pedder is just unfathomable at the moment. They've known since they built the Edgar and Scotts Peak Dam that they were constructed on or adjacent to the Edgar fault line, which I'm not an engineer, but you probably wouldn't build a dam on a fault line. And now they understand they have to spend millions of dollars to strengthen these dams so that in the event of seismic activity, they're not just going to crumble and fall over immediately. They will fail slowly. And you just cannot help but wonder when the world is in dire need of vast wilderness areas, why that money is not being invested into restoring Pedder, because as you rightfully say, you can easily replace the energy that it can generate with a couple of wind turbines. It's very small, or a bit of rooftop solar around around the island wouldn't hurt either.
Yeah.
There's been numerous iterations of campaigns to restore Pedder over the years, but since the day it was flooded, and of course Pedder 2000 is the notable campaign with the federal inquiry. It was called Pedder 2000, but it took place in the early 90s. Did you have any role to play in that?
Yes, I got involved in again in the Melbourne side of Pedder 2000. So we had quite an active group of people. The late and dearly missed Les Southall played quite a role in Pedder 2000 in Melbourne, the Melbourne part of that. And I was involved for quite a few years. We had lots of meetings and organised a number of public meetings, and we had some art performances. We just tried to raise the issue of unflooding the lake in Victoria and Melbourne. At that time, I decided to, or in fact, Bob Brown encouraged me to publish a poster with one of my photos of Pedder. So I did the large poster of Lake Pedder in about 1994. So that was all part of the Pedder 2000, and we were hoping that by the year 2000, Pedder would be unflooded, but of course we weren't successful with that, and Restore Pedder's really picked up that pattern and is doing a great job, I think, in trying to change the government's views.
It's not your traditional environmental or conservation campaign. We're so used to stopping destruction, not advocating for the restoration of something. Of course, in restoring something, there's no deadlines. You really got your own goalposts in many regards. There's no bulldozers coming in on a set date or planning approvals that have to be in. So it's a whole other ball game. But There is a fantastic image of you and a young Kevin Kiernan with a few other campaigners on the beach of Lake Pedder in, I think it's March 1972.
Correct. Yeah.
And it was the Mercury article titled, "They'll climb trees to save the lake if necessary." So you obviously didn't do that, but
No, we didn't climb the trees. Yeah, it is a good photo. And as you say, Kevin was there, who went on to, about 4 years later, to be a co-founder of the Wilderness Society in Tasmania. And we were standing defiant, and it was good to get the publicity. I mean, any publicity, as you know, we appreciate. And the other person, there's two other people that I knew in that photograph, John Brownlee and Sue Brownlee. John Brownlee was also a photographer, and we took photos together from the Franklin Range of the lake. And John's photograph ended up being, there's a small book called Small Paperback A4 Shaped Book, Save Lake Pedder, I think it's called. And John's photo is on the front cover of that book. And I took my photo that was, it's been used on the poster and the jigsaw and extensively in other places at the same time. So we both took the same view of the lake.
So your new book concludes with some diary excerpts from the South Coast Track, a magnificent wild place, and you have to go there to understand exactly how special and welcoming it is for a wild place. And you call it the most treasured wild place you've ever been to, which is a huge statement and testament to the South Coast Track region, given the places that you've travelled around the world that are truly wild. What are your thoughts? Many people compare the South Coast Track and regions like Cox Bight to having a similar sense of place to the beach at Lake Pedder. Do you feel that that's an accurate statement, just in your experience?
Yes, I stand by. Well, obviously, I stand by my comment that I make in the book that the South Coast is the most beautiful wild place that I've been to. And no, everyone has their own favourite wild places, I guess. But for me, the combination of the coast and the mountains and the remoteness and the wildness and the beauty of that coastline just all adds up to a very, very special place for me. Some of that might be related to like that it was a coast that I came across early in my travels to wild places, but it still remains very, very special. And I think there is a link between the wildness of that coast and the wildness and the beauty of Lake Pedder. I think it's a combination. There's some strange chemistry goes on with when the water and mountains are together, and that's what you get in both those places. So you've got the beautiful, particularly the Franklin Range, it sets off Lake Pedder in a beautiful way. And at the same time, on the south coast, you've got the Ironbound Range and the various other ranges adjacent to this coast with beautiful beaches in between the mountain ranges. So I think both, it's something about mountains and the water and that you got at Lake Pedder and you do get at the south coast at the same time.
Other question I was going to ask you is, what did you think made Lake Pedder such a special place? But you very much just answered that, I think.
I hope so. I think like my strongest memory of Pedder is from that first visit, and that's often the case, I think, with the first time you come to a place can remain your strongest and most powerful memory. And so coming to Lake Pedder after we'd been in the Eastern Arthurs, we'd had a week of very bad weather. We'd come down into the valley and the weather fined up, and then we get to Lake Pedder and encounter this very, very beautiful lake. I think that remains my most powerful and strongest memory of Lake Pedder.
Do you have any lessons that you've learned from all of the magnificent places that you've been to that we, as not just here in Tasmania, but anywhere, that younger people should be doing to better protect or share the importance of natural wild places?
I think one of the points that I make in the new book is that, unfortunately, we can never take for granted the protection of wild places. We just never know what governments or decision makers are going to do that we might strongly disagree with, which I certainly do with the proposal to put private commercial huts on the south coast. And so we just have to keep reminding the broader community and reminding the decision makers of how valuable wild places are to the human spirit.
What an extraordinary life of adventures. Huge thanks to David for sharing his time and his story, and for all of his ongoing work to conserve our world's wild places. We'll pop a link to his newest book, Chasing the Mountain Light, into the episode notes. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can help us out by sharing it with friends and rating it on whatever platform you listen in from. Thank you for tuning in for another year. This is our last episode for 2022. The 50th year since Pedder's temporary flooding. Have the best Christmas and start to 2023. We are another year closer to Lake Pedder's inevitable restoration.